Hey guys, tonight we begin somewhere quiet, warm, and ancient, beside the slow, sleepy flow of the Nile. It's a hazy dawn, the kind that smells faintly of wet earth and distant cattle. You can feel the mud squish between your toes as you step off the reed raft, eyes adjusting to the soft golden light glinting off the water. Papyrus reeds whisper secrets to the breeze, and ibises stalk frogs like miniature feathered dinosaurs. But don't get too comfortable. Between crocodiles, heat stroke, and the occasional angry hippo, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're here, drop a comment with your location and what time you're tuning in. Just curious who's wandering down the Nile with us tonight. You're standing in what will one day be called Egypt, but right now, it's just a long river in an otherwise cranky desert. There are no pyramids yet, no hieroglyphs, just scattered communities of early farmers clinging to the banks of the Nile like moss on a rock, and they're figuring things out, slowly. You can see them digging irrigation ditches with bone tools, hauling baskets of silt, and chanting to gods whose names haven't quite settled yet. Probably something like Sky Thing who sends rain, sometimes. The magic starts with the flood. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile bursts its banks and drowns the fields. But here's the trick. Instead of ruining everything, it brings life. Dark, fertile silt spills out across the land. And unlike Mesopotamia's chaotic, unpredictable rivers, the Nile is gentle, regular as breathing. That rhythm, that pulse, is the first heartbeat of what becomes one of the longest-lasting civilizations on Earth. You walk among those early settlers. Their homes are made of mud brick and woven mats. Cattle graze nearby, sacred and stubborn. The smell is, let's call it, earthy. You watch as someone drops a pottery jar. It shatters, but the fragments get swept into a pile. Later, someone will discover those shards and give them a fancy name: pre-dynastic artifacts. What's fascinating is how early Egypt was already divided, not politically, but spiritually. To the south is Upper Egypt, home of narrow riverbanks and tall white crowns. To the north is Lower Egypt, with its wide delta and red-crowned rulers. They don't always get along. It's like trying to merge two wildly different family WhatsApp groups, and yet both depend entirely on the Nile. The river is god, grocery store, and gossip column all in one. Historians still argue whether the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt was a peaceful process, or more of a hostile corporate takeover. Either way, by around 3100 BCE, a guy named Nama, or maybe Menes, Egyptologists are a little fuzzy on that, pulls it off. You can practically hear the ceremonial scepters clink as Upper Egypt's king conquers or marries his way into ruling the whole shebang. The famous Nama palette, basically ancient political propaganda carved into stone, shows him wearing both crowns, smiting enemies like it's casual Friday. From here, things start to get ambitious. Writing shows up, scratched into pottery and carved into ivory tags. The first hieroglyphs. You spot scribes hunched over reed pens, inventing symbols for ox, river, life. And because priorities, beer. Egypt becomes a place of order, of divine symmetry. The people start building tombs, not pyramids yet, just mastabas, rectangular mud brick boxes. But inside, the walls are painted with food, furniture, and pets. You know, all the essentials for the afterlife, including occasionally a pet monkey in a boat. No judgment. The concept of Ma'at, or cosmic balance, starts to dominate. You hear it in their prayers, see it in their art. Everything must be in harmony. River and field, sun and shadow, pharaoh and farmer. You, of course, are still barefoot in the mud, watching as priests light incense to invisible forces, hoping to please gods shaped like jackals, falcons, and beetles. One fringe theory even suggests that early Egyptian elites used hallucinogenic blue lotus flowers during rituals. Picture this: sacred drums, chanting priests, and someone off to the side vibing very hard with a sunflower mask on. Again, no judgment. Over time, you notice the villages becoming towns, towns becoming cities. Trade picks up: obsidian, gold, lapis lazuli. Boats crisscross the Nile like tuk-tuks at rush hour. Everyone wants something: a sharper blade, a fancier jar, a better spot in the afterlife. But for all this progress, life isn't easy. If the floods are too low, famine follows. Too high, and entire settlements get wiped out. You pass one community abandoning their homes, carrying goatskins and bundles of grain, heads bowed as priests mumble that the gods are just testing us again. Still, they endure. And it's this resilience, this ability to read the river's moods and make order from chaos, that lays the foundation for dynasties to come. You can feel the anticipation in the air. Pharaohs are coming, monuments are coming, and a very famous tomb-raiding curse is somewhere far, far down the road. For now, though, the world is still young. You lie back in the grass near a fishing net, the sun warm on your face. Somewhere nearby, someone is painting a symbol on a clay jar, a bird for air, a snake for royalty, a loaf of bread because, well, carbs are eternal. You close your eyes to the sound of river reeds rustling. It's not a kingdom yet, but it's about to be. You wake to heat. Dry, relentless, stubborn heat that bakes the soles of your feet and turns the ground to brittle chalk. Welcome to Old Kingdom Egypt, around 2700 BCE. And the sun isn't just something you complain about. It's Ra, a god, a blazing eyeball in the sky, whose mood decides whether your crops grow or your bones dry out in a sand dune. The Nile still flows, steady and smug, but now everything around it has changed. Villages have become cities. Cities have become statements. And you're standing in the shadow of something enormous, something smooth, white, and utterly bonkers, a pyramid. You crane your neck. The thing is made of limestone, blocks the size of your sofa, stacked with almost terrifying precision. The workers, tens of thousands of them, haul, heave, and haul some more under the direction of overseers who yell a lot and probably haven't lifted anything heavier than a pomegranate in years. Despite what you may have heard, these workers aren't slaves. They're paid labourers, and they're proud of it. The graffiti even says so. The drunkards of Menkaura wasn't exactly corporate speak, but it tells you something about morale. You shuffle past dusty tents and temporary bakeries, the smell of yeast and onions mixing with sweat and ambition. Everyone's part of a massive national project. Egypt, under the rule of kings like Djoser and Sneferu, is becoming a monument to itself. And then comes Khufu, the man behind the Great Pyramid of Giza. His building project is so bold, it might as well come with its own theme music. Historians still argue whether the pyramid was purely a tomb or if it had extra purposes. Cosmic calendar, initiation chamber, or alien landing pad. Okay, that last one's fringe, even by fringe standards. Either way, Khufu leaves behind something that still messes with modern engineers. It's almost rude how well it's held up. Meanwhile, you slip into the shade of a palm tree near a temple. Inside, high priests chant in praise of gods who now come with titles and temples. Thoth, the ibis-headed nerd god of writing. Anubis, the jackal-faced embalmer with zero bedside manner. Bastet, the cat goddess, worshipped, pampered, probably feared a little. You watch someone leave a bowl of milk at her statue's feet. Cats, it seems, have always known they're divine. The pharaoh, now firmly styled as the living god on earth, is everything. His word is law, his face carved into statues taller than a giraffe's daydream. And yet, most Egyptians will never see him. You hear his name whispered with awe in granaries, on fishing boats, even in the weaving sheds. His job is to uphold Ma'at, that delicate balance between chaos and order. And in return, eternal divinity, small price to pay for micromanaging a civilization. Out in the necropolis, scribes and artisans are busy too. You peek into a tomb being painted by a man with cobalt-stained fingers. The walls bloom with colour, figures farming, feasting, even playing board games with the gods. It's not just about remembrance. It's about continuation. If you don't put a loaf of bread on the tomb wall, the guy inside might go hungry for eternity. Imagine starving in the afterlife because someone forgot your snack mural. Here's a weird tidbit. Ancient Egyptian sunscreen might have been made of crocodile dung. No, really. Mixed with oil and applied to ward off both sunburn and, maybe, evil spirits. That's commitment. You see someone slathering it on now, looking deeply unbothered. But not everything is divine light and orderly stonework. Beneath the surface, cracks form. The cost of pyramids is enormous. The power of local governors, nomarchs, is rising. Each district becomes a mini-kingdom with its own priorities, its own taxes, and, its own ambitions. You overhear scribes muttering about declining harvests, miscounts in the grain store, and of course, the usual bureaucratic drama. Even the mighty Nile starts to misbehave. The floods weaken, crops suffer, people starve. The central government falters under the weight of its own grandeur. You sit in a marketplace and feel the tension. Merchants arguing over prices, priests offering extra prayers, kids skipping school to scavenge for food. A once smooth machine now grinds and lurches. By the end of the Old Kingdom, the Grand Pyramid Age fizzles out. No one has the resources or unity to build that big anymore. Pharaohs become shadows of their former selves. You walk past a tomb where someone has scratched graffiti over a king's name. That's the ancient Egyptian version of unsubscribed. And yet, despite all this, the ordinary Egyptian keeps going. You spend time in a small village where a potter shapes jars with her feet and hands in rhythm, humming a tune older than most countries. A fisherman tells you about his dream, where a hippo offered him financial advice. It was mostly about diversifying fish sources. You start to realize something. Egypt isn't just pharaohs and temples and gold masks. It's the day-to-day lives of people making sense of a divine world with very real taxes. People who leave behind not just monuments, but diaries, letters, and shopping lists. One ostracon, a shard of pottery used like scratch paper, records a guy complaining about his co-worker's laziness. Some things never change. So here you are, standing on the edge of something. The grand age of pyramid building is over. The centralized kingdom is crumbling. But Egypt's not done. It's just catching its breath. And behind you, the Great Pyramid still stands, a silent witness to a civilization trying to figure out how to be eternal without collapsing under its own weight. You step over a cracked irrigation ditch, the mud dried and flaking like an old pastry, and something feels off. The Nile hasn't flooded properly in years. The air carries less of that rich, earthy scent and more of a brittle, dusty chill. Egypt is wobbling, and unlike before, no one seems entirely sure who's in charge anymore. You wander through a village where the locals barely glance up. They're tired. The harvests have failed again. Even the cats look concerned. The tomb painters have stopped mid-scene. Half a goose, half a prayer. And you hear whispers of tombs being raided for bread rather than treasure. The afterlife can wait. People are starving now. Welcome to Egypt's first intermediate period, where the wheels fall off the golden chariot for the first time. Pharaohs? What pharaohs? The last strong ones are gone, their successors reduced to names scratched into hastily made stelae. Some rule from Memphis, others claim Thebes. But if you squint, you'll notice none of them seem very convincing. It's like Egypt's on airplane mode. Messages aren't getting through, tombs aren't safe, and provincial warlords, nomarchs, have started acting more like little kings. You travel south and north, passing what feel like border checkpoints between rival Egyptian territories. Each nome, that's what they called their districts, now answers to its own miniature bureaucracy. Taxes are localized. Justice depends on whether your local ruler had breakfast. You visit one town where the priest and the mayor are the same guy, and he's very drunk on date beer. Historians still argue whether this collapse was sudden or more of a slow-motion unraveling. Some blame low Nile floods. Others cite internal corruption. Maybe it was both. Either way, what had been one of the world's first nation-states now resembles a sandbox full of quarreling toddlers, each building their own little mud castle kingdom. But even in this chaos, culture doesn't disappear. You sneak into a scribe's hut, more out of curiosity than espionage, and find someone writing poetry. Not hymns or oaths, but emotional, raw stuff. Laments about loss, hunger, and the gods being silent. There's this one called The Dialogue of a Man with His Soul, where a guy literally debates with himself whether life is worth it. A 4,000-year-old existential crisis. Relatable. And here's your quirky tidbit. One ruler from Heracleopolis, anxious to prove he was still a legitimate king, built a royal tomb, then hosted the opening as a sort of look how not dead I am party. It didn't exactly inspire national unity, but the hors d'oeuvres were probably great. As you drift south, the mood shifts. You arrive in Thebes, future capital of glory, and it's bubbling with energy. Unlike the north, these folks seem organized, hopeful even. You meet Mentuhotep II, a man with ambition tucked under his neat white headdress. He's not just some local strongman. He's planning a comeback story for the entire country. You walk with his soldiers, not the heavily armored elite of old, but lean, disciplined men hardened by famine and factional fighting. They're marching to reunify Egypt, and you can feel the momentum. When Mentuhotep finally crushes the northern rivals, Egypt doesn't just get a new king, it gets a reboot. Suddenly, tombs are back in fashion. Temples go up again. The Nile, maybe guilt-ridden, starts flooding reliably once more. You pass an old farmer blessing the water as it rises past his knees, muttering thanks to Happy, the Nile god, and tossing in a fig as an offering. It bobs cheerfully downstream. You try not to imagine a crocodile eating it and demanding dessert. With reunification comes a fresh political approach. This time, the kings of the Middle Kingdom rule less like divine robots and more like hands-on managers. Amenemhat I, for instance, builds a new capital, Ijtawi, smack in the middle of nowhere. Why? Because centrality equals control. No more letting powerful governors do whatever they want. This pharaoh is watching, and he has a spreadsheet. But the most fascinating part, the literature booms. Egypt gets introspective. You hear tales of shipwrecked sailors meeting talking serpents. Wisdom texts pass between fathers and sons. You even glimpse the instructions of Amenemhat, where a king, posthumously, awkwardly, warns his son that trusting anyone will get you stabbed. Fun family dynamic. Still, the power behind the throne starts shifting. The priesthood grows richer. Bureaucrats multiply. You visit one temple where the priest owns more cattle than the nearby village combined. He offers you a fig, but it's mostly a bribe, so you won't notice the new gold statue he's installing for himself. The Middle Kingdom isn't perfect, but it's stable. Roads are built. Canals are dug. Trade resumes with places like Nubia and Byblos. You follow a caravan bringing myrrh and baboons from Punt. Yes, actual baboons. And wonder how the customs paperwork works for that. You also wonder whether the baboons are getting enough water, but no one seems particularly worried. It's around this time that pyramid building makes a modest comeback, though nothing quite like the Giza giants. The new pyramids are smaller, more budget-conscious, like government-issued tombs. You stroll past one being built, and the foreman complains about the limestone quality, the labourers' laziness, and how things just aren't like they were under Sneferu. Yet, there's a quiet confidence in the air. Egypt has fallen and gotten back up again. You sit in a garden outside a scribe's house. He's reading love poetry aloud, and his cat keeps trying to knock the scroll over. Life is far from golden, but it's real, vivid, lived in. Still, you can feel the tremors coming. At the edges of the map, strange names appear. Hyksos, foreigners from the northeast, and they don't seem interested in papyrus poetry. But for now, you finish your drink, fermented barley, with a weird tang, and lean back, letting the sound of a calm Nile lull you into temporary peace. Egypt has weathered its first storm. It won't be its last. The Nile glides past you like a silk ribbon, smooth and steady, as you approach the Middle Kingdom in full bloom. Egypt is no longer crumbling, no longer grasping at the memory of greatness. It's humming again, like a well-oiled chariot. The scent of lotus and clay fills the air, and everywhere you go, people are busy, in a we've got quotas to meet kind of way. You arrive in Ijtawi, the new capital built by Amenemhat I, and immediately get the sense that everything here was designed by someone who really loves logistics. Wide roads, neat canals, palace complexes arranged with ruler-straight precision. It's not flashy, it's functional. This is Egypt's bureaucratic age, and you've just stepped into the scribe's paradise. You're handed a reed pen, a list of supplies, and a stern look. Don't worry, you're not expected to run the country. But scribes, they run everything. You watch one overseeing a shipment of grain, then walk next door to file a complaint about a miscounted goat, then pause to log a priest's latest dream from Ra, which is apparently legally binding. Scribes are the Middle Kingdom's backbone. They're everywhere: courthouses, temples, workshops. One even gives you a scroll of the infamous Satire of the Trades, where a scribe explains why his job is better than, say, bricklaying or crocodile tending. Spoiler: every other job ends with someone covered in blood, sweat, or regret. This period is cautious but clever. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty have figured out that soft power, like predictable taxes and not annoying your southern neighbours too much, gets you further than bragging about being Ra's favourite nephew. You sit in on a court case where a landowner is suing her neighbour over an olive tree. The judge listens, nods, asks for evidence, and rules fairly. There's even an appeals process. Ancient Egypt just unlocked civil service. Still, don't let the balance sheets fool you. There's ambition here. You see it in the expansion south into Nubia, where Egyptian forts sprout like mushrooms along the Nile. The Egyptians want gold, incense, and exotic goods, and the only way to get it is to control the trade routes. So you march with troops and traders through elephant grass, listening to Nubian drums and the splash of oars as they glide past crocodile-filled shallows. And yes, the crocodiles are still very much a thing. You climb one of the border fortresses, mud brick, rectangular, efficient, and gaze south. Egypt's footprint is getting bigger, but unlike before, they're not trying to conquer everything at once. It's more of a strategic annexation with extra steps. One quirky moment. At the fortress of Buhan, you find what might be the earliest known cat door, a small arched opening in the lower wall. Whether it was for cats, dogs, or really disciplined goats is still debated, but it's oddly charming. Back in Egypt proper, the tombs are changing too. No more giant pyramids on the scale of Giza. Instead, nobles build rock-cut tombs into cliffsides, especially in Beni Hassan. You climb through one and find vivid murals of wrestling matches, archery practice, and even juggling. You almost forget you're in a tomb. The dead here wanted to party forever, apparently. But even as things seem stable, you notice something brewing beneath the surface. Pharaohs begin to rely more on viziers, essentially prime ministers with fancy titles and zero chill. You watch Amenemhat III, a capable ruler by all counts, delegate massive power to his officials. The bureaucracy bloats. Decisions get slower. A temple construction is delayed because someone misfiled a cow census. Historians still argue whether this creeping over-bureaucratization was the beginning of the end for the Middle Kingdom. Some say the system collapsed under its own weight. Others blame the gradual weakening of centralized authority after Amenemhat III. Either way, the machinery that once ran like clockwork starts making strange noises. You're standing in a palace courtyard when news spreads. Foreigners are moving into the delta. At first, they're traders, then mercenaries, then rulers. The Hyksos are coming, and they're bringing some serious upgrades. Horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, and apparently way better helmets. Still, you wander through one of the last grand projects of the age, the labyrinth at Hawara, also commissioned by Amenemhat III. You get lost almost instantly. It's massive, maze-like, and deeply symbolic. Some say it inspired later Greek legends. A scribe mentions that it houses over 3,000 rooms. You find the first 5, then a cat. Then you give up and follow the smell of bread. But even here, in this fading light of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt still shines. You attend a festival honoring Osiris, where men wear towering white crowns and women sing songs that sound older than time itself. The smell of incense curls into the dusk as lotus petals float in wine. You spot a nobleman reading a love poem aloud to his wife, tender, awkward, and deeply human. Egypt, as always, is more than kings and conquest. It's what people do when they think no one's watching, the way they bury their dead, the songs they hum while grinding grain, the stories they whisper about gods who cry, love, rage, and forgive. So as the Middle Kingdom closes, you find yourself staring at the horizon, the sun hanging low over the Nile. The light is soft, but your instincts tingle. Something is coming. You wake to shouting, not the bureaucratic bickering of the scribes you're used to, but something sharper, stranger. The air feels tense, and the ground trembles faintly under hooves. Horses. Lots of them. That's new. And in a country where donkeys have ruled the transport scene for centuries, horses means something serious just galloped into town. You make your way north toward the Nile Delta, and the change is immediate. The architecture shifts. The accents are different. There are foreign goods in the markets. Silver jewelry from Syria, strange spices, curved blades. Egypt is no longer Egypt as you knew it. It's been invaded, or maybe just absorbed, by newcomers from the northeast. They call themselves the Hyksos. The Egyptian scribes, unimpressed, label them rulers of foreign lands. You overhear one scribe mumbling something about them being barbarians with better toys, and he's not entirely wrong. The Hyksos arrive with chariots, fast, deadly, loud. They bring bronze weapons and slick, multi-layered bows that outshoot anything the Egyptians currently have. And they install themselves as kings in Avaris, up in the delta, building their own temples and scribbling their names alongside Egyptian gods like Set, whom they rather like. Because who doesn't enjoy a little chaos? You pass a temple where Set's statue has been polished to a shine. The priests pretend everything's fine, but you hear the tension in their voices. Egypt's divine order, Ma'at, has been punctured and not everyone thinks it's going to bounce back. Still, life for many Egyptians goes on, albeit with foreign accents and new rulers. One quirky detail: Hyksos rulers actually adopt Egyptian royal titles and customs. You watch a coronation where a guy named Khayan, not a drop of Egyptian blood in him, solemnly dons the white crown of Upper Egypt, while a priest reads from scrolls he probably can't understand. Awkward? Definitely, but surprisingly effective. Historians still argue how violent the Hyksos takeover really was. Was it a sudden invasion, or more of a gradual, hello, we live here now situation? The archaeological record's a little vague. Some cities were burned, yes, but others seem to have adapted. You sit at a clay tablet school, where a boy named Neb refers to the Hyksos pharaoh as His Excellency, while secretly doodling chariot wheels in the margins. But not all of Egypt is under Hyksos control. The south, especially Thebes, remains defiantly independent. You travel upriver and feel the difference immediately. The air is hotter, the loyalty fiercer. These southern kings, calling themselves the 17th dynasty, are clearly tired of the situation. You walk past a military camp where recruits train by throwing spears at painted chariot targets. The message is clear: enough is enough. One name keeps popping up: Seqenenre-Tao, a ruler from Thebes who finally has the guts, or possibly the frustration, to challenge the Hyksos. You sneak into a war council where everyone's arguing over tactics, and Seqenenre leans forward with a clenched fist. His plan? Push north. Reclaim Egypt. End this foreign rule business once and for all. Spoiler: it doesn't go great. Later, you stand over Seqenenre's mummy. Yes, really. And see the brutal dents in his skull. Axe wounds, crushed cheekbones. Historians debate whether he died in battle or was captured and executed, but one thing's clear: he went down fighting. The spark is lit. His sons, Kamose and Amosi, pick up the torch. You march beside their armies, spears rattling and war chants rising over the reeds. They've learned from their enemies. Now they have chariots. You watch as one group ambushes a Hyksos supply caravan, stealing arrows and singing victory songs before sundown. Eventually, it's Ahmose who finishes the job. You enter Avaris at his side, the city smouldering. The last Hyksos pharaoh flees, and Egypt belongs to the Egyptians again. The people cheer, cats yawn dramatically, and the scribes dust off their praising the pharaoh scroll templates. And just like that, the second intermediate period ends, and something new rises from the ashes. This isn't just a restoration, it's a rebranding, a glow-up. Welcome to the new kingdom. Ahmose knows that Egypt needs to stop playing defense, so instead of waiting for the next batch of foreign invaders, he sends his armies outward. You hear about raids into Nubia, campaigns into Canaan. Egypt's no longer just protecting its borders, it's building an empire. In Thebes, the temples grow taller. You sit under the shadow of Karnak as priests lead processions past rows of sphinxes. A festival to Amun, the new king of the gods, is underway. His cult has ballooned in wealth and power, and honestly, the guy's got the best PR team in the divine business. One fringe theory you overhear: some believe the Hyksos actually helped jumpstart Egyptian innovation. Before them, Egypt was slow to adapt. But after, chariots, bronze weapons, better fortifications, new trade links, it's like someone installed a software update. Egypt 2.0. Still, beneath all the triumph, you sense the shift. Egypt will never be as isolated again. The world has gotten bigger, messier. From now on, Egypt must look out as much as it looks inward. But for now, Thebes celebrates. You dance with festival goers beneath oil lamps that flicker like starlight, the drums of Amun pounding through the earth. Egypt has been wounded, fractured, humbled, but never broken. And now, it's about to roar. Your ears are still ringing from the festival drums as you drift into the new kingdom proper. And it feels like stepping into a civilization that just found its swagger. This is Egypt at full volume. Bigger temples, bolder art, better armor, and pharaohs who act like rock stars with armies. The Nile still hums its old lullaby, but the cities have changed. Thebes gleams with gold-tipped obelisks. Karnak is no longer a temple. It's a city within a city. The priests of Amun practically run an entire economic sector now. And you can't swing a date palm without hitting a sacred goose or an incense merchant. The divine bureaucracy is thriving. You're here for the golden age, and the energy is palpable. You spot Thutmose I charging into Nubia, spear lifted high, eyes like someone who really enjoys conquest. He's pushing further south than any pharaoh before him, through cataracts, jungle heat, and into the gold-laced hills of Kush. He's not just securing resources, he's planting flags. And then comes Hatshepsut. You raise an eyebrow as this king, steps up with a false beard, royal kilt, and no intention of playing second to any man. Historians still argue whether she seized power or stepped in to save the kingdom, while her stepson Thutmose III was too young. Either way, she rules like she was born for it. You walk beside her magnificent trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt. The voyage is stunning, sails snapping, monkeys squawking, frankincense trees being loaded into crates. When they return, Hatshepsut immortalizes the whole thing on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. You climb the steps there now, flanked by statues of her in full pharaonic regalia, and wonder if anyone in history has ever been this good at branding. A quirky detail: Hatshepsut also built massive obelisks and claimed the god Amun fathered her by visiting her mother in the form of a breeze. You hear this being whispered by temple guides with a smirk. Divine conception, classic PR move. But eventually, Thutmose III grows up and the mood shifts. He's not content with just finishing temple renovations. No, he wants an empire. You march with his troops through Canaan and into Syria, through sieges, ambushes, and endless scrolls of victory records. You even peek at the famous Battle of Megiddo, where Thutmose pulls a surprise flanking move that still gets military nerds excited. By the end of his reign, Egypt controls land from the Euphrates to the Fourth Cataract. You watch governors send tribute from dusty outposts, baskets of lapis lazuli, dancing bears, exotic dancers. Yes, really. Egypt isn't just rich, it's in demand. You're there when Amenhotep III throws a festival for his seed jubilee, essentially a royal reboot party to show he's still got it. The guy builds everything: Luxor temple, palace complexes, massive statues that make you feel like an ant with social anxiety. He marries a woman named Tiye, not royal-born, not foreign, but powerful in her own right. Together, they rule with confidence, style, and a jewelry budget that could bankrupt a small nation. Meanwhile, art blossoms. You pass workshops turning out intricate faience amulets and golden scarabs. Music, literature, and architecture all hit new highs. You sit in on a poetry recital where one scribe reads a love poem that includes the line, "Your voice is sweet as goose fat on hot bread," romantic and strangely specific. But there's tension beneath the gold. You overhear grumbles that the priesthood of Amun is too powerful, that the state is spending more on temples than soldiers, that maybe Egypt is looking outward too much and inward too little. Still, this is a time of power, and it's not over yet. You're summoned to the border, near modern Syria, to witness a new kind of conflict. The Hittites, a rising power from Anatolia, are flexing hard. Egypt meets them head-on under Seti I, and the air smells like iron, sweat, and nerves. You're in a world now where empires are colliding, not just raiding. Then comes Ramses II. If Egypt ever had a drama king, it's him. You're blinded by statues. They're everywhere. Ramses with arms crossed. Ramses smiting enemies. Ramses posing with wives. Ramses sitting. Ramses standing. Ramses possibly winking. It's a one-man marketing machine and the budget is limitless. The crown jewel, Abu Simbel. You sail upriver and see it carved straight into the cliff, 4 colossal figures of Ramses staring out at eternity. You step inside and the light filters in exactly as planned, illuminating the inner sanctum twice a year. Astronomical flex. And then you hit the Battle of Kadesh. You're on the front lines as 20,000 Egyptian troops face off against the Hittite army. Ramses leads the charge, gets caught in an ambush, pulls a dramatic solo counterattack, allegedly, and declares it a grand victory, even though the result was more of a draw. Historians still argue whether Kadesh was a brilliant piece of military theatre or just a very expensive tie. Either way, Ramses has the battle carved into every available wall in Egypt. It's hard to walk 5 feet in a temple without tripping over a war chariot mural. Eventually, Ramses makes peace with the Hittites, the first known peace treaty in history, complete with cuneiform copies sent between capitals. You glance at the papyrus and appreciate the elegance of diplomacy wrapped in pharaonic posturing. Ramses rules for 66 years. He outlives wives, children, and probably his favourite sandals. By the end, you wander through his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, long, winding, and painted in dreamlike blue. You pause at his mummified face much later in a museum, and he still looks smug. Egypt under the New Kingdom is at its loudest, richest, and most glorious. But the weight of empire, as always, begins to tell. Outside, forces stir. Internally, the gods start demanding more than offerings. They want control. You sense the gold-plated armor beginning to crack. You're standing in a grand courtyard, sunlight bouncing off polished limestone, when something quietly extraordinary happens. A woman enters, wearing the pharaoh's crown, not behind a throne, not as someone's queen, but seated on the throne. This is Hatshepsut, and she's about to bend the rules of kingship like a reed in the Nile breeze. You squint at her royal portrait. Beard? Check. Muscular arms? Check. But also, unmistakably, a woman. Egypt has never seen anything quite like this, and though future generations will chip her name from stone, for a while she rules brilliantly, boldly even, while dressed like her male predecessors. Historians still argue whether she seized power or was gracefully handed the reins, while her stepson, Thutmose III, was still toddling around with a practiced scepter. Either way, she doesn't just warm the seat, she claims it. You walk through her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, and it is, no exaggeration, a masterpiece. Terraced levels, elegant colonnades, reliefs that depict not just gods and offerings, but expeditions. Ah yes, Punt, that mysterious land of incense, monkeys, and frankincense trees. You sail with her fleet, watching rowers stroke in perfect rhythm as the smell of myrrh and sea salt fills the air. The locals of Punt greet the Egyptians with open arms, and perhaps a bit of side-eye at all the note-taking scribes. There's even a mural of the Queen of Punt, with pronounced physical features that Egyptologists still puzzle over. A quirky little highlight. Hatshepsut had full-grown incense trees from Punt, shipped back to Egypt in baskets of dirt. You walk past one in the temple gardens, guarded like treasure. Who else imports trees for bragging rights? But not all is in sense and harmony. You hear murmurs from the priesthood. This whole female pharaoh thing makes them twitchy. And when Thutmose III finally comes of age, it's clear he's been waiting. Hatshepsut disappears from the record, possibly from illness, possibly something more sinister. Years later, her name is chiseled off monuments, statues toppled, achievements reassigned. Still, you sense she was never truly forgotten. Every step through her temple echoes with legacy. And Thutmose III, he doesn't just take over, he erupts. You march with him through Canaan, past the cliffs of Megiddo, and into Syria. His military campaigns are clockwork precise. He's like the ancient world's version of a spreadsheet general, always calculating, always one move ahead. He's also a temple builder. You stand in Karnak as additions rise around you like well-fed mushrooms. He even builds a special chamber called the Festival Hall, just to mark how long he's reigned. You're beginning to see a pattern here. Kings with free time equals lots of architecture. But even Thutmose can't reign forever, and eventually the throne passes through a string of capable rulers. Amenhotep II, then Thutmose IV, until it lands in the lap of Amenhotep III. Now he knows how to throw a party. This guy treats kingship like an art form. You lounge with him at Malkata Palace, surrounded by perfumed courtiers, pet leopards, and imported wine from Lebanon. He builds monuments like he's afraid they'll run out of stone. The colossi of Memnon. Those are his. You stand between them now, staring up at twin faces carved with bored confidence. He also marries Tie, a non-royal woman whose intelligence and influence ripple through the court like a thrown pebble. You sit near her in the audience chamber and note how the scribes listen extra carefully when she speaks. But while the court dazzles, something strange stirs in the shadows. The sun. Specifically, a new god, Aten, the sun disk. Amenhotep III flirts with the idea of a solar-centric religion, but it's his son, originally named Amenhotep IV, who commits to the bit hard. You watch with mild horror as the prince transforms into Akhenaten, a pharaoh who doesn't just favor one god. He cancels all the others. He shuts down temples, fires priests, and builds a brand new capital in the middle of nowhere. Akhetaten, now called Amarna. You visit, and it's odd. No bustling temples to Amun, no Osiris fan clubs. Just long, shallow reliefs of Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, bathed in rays from a sun disk with tiny fingers. Everything changes. Art becomes softer, more naturalistic. Akhenaten himself is carved with a strange, elongated body and full lips. Historians still argue whether it was a health condition, a spiritual vision, or just avant-garde aesthetics. Some call it beautiful, others unsettling. You can't decide. You sit in a courtyard watching Akhenaten compose hymns to Aten, his voice quivering with devotion. Nefertiti stands nearby, graceful and enigmatic, her tall blue crown casting a perfect silhouette in the morning light. One day, her bust will become the most famous face of ancient Egypt, but for now, she just gazes skyward. But not everyone buys into the sun cult. The people whisper, grain shipments falter, tombs are neglected, the gods feel absent. Egypt is confused, unsure. When Akhenaten dies, the sun goes down on his strange utopia. The court quickly pivots. The boy king, Tutankhaten, changes his name to Tutankhamun. You see the statues of Amun being dusted off and repositioned like nothing happened. The temples reopen. The city of Amarna is abandoned, the sand eager to swallow its strange geometry. You leave just as the royal sculptors begin reshaping history, chiseling Akhenaten out of Egypt's story like a coffee stain on sacred linen. But you remember, you were there when the sun ruled everything, when Egypt forgot its gods and nearly forgot itself. You stand on the edge of a candlelit room, deep within the Valley of the Kings, watching as servants gently place amulets around the linen-wrapped body of a boy. There's incense in the air, a murmur of prayers to Osiris, and a tense hush. The boy is dead. He was king. And now, finally, the gods might make sense of his short, complicated life. Tutankhamun. You probably didn't expect a teenager to become the most famous pharaoh in history. He didn't build great temples. He didn't conquer anything. He wasn't even old enough to grow a decent beard. But as you kneel beside his sarcophagus, listening to the priests chant, you know, he's about to become immortal for reasons no one in this room could guess. His story begins in the shadow of chaos. He was just a kid when the sun-worshipping heresy of Akhenaten came crashing down. You recall that odd capital, Amarna, the strange art, the empty temples, the bewildered priests polishing statues that no one was allowed to pray to. When Akhenaten died, everything changed fast. Young Tut was a tool of restoration, or more gently, a symbol of national healing. You see the advisors behind him, Horemheb, maybe even his own wife Ankhesenamun, pulling strings and whispering prayers. They guide him to abandon Atenism, restore the old gods, and bring Egypt back into balance. You stroll through Karnak during this quiet undoing. Amun's priests are back in business, their shaved heads gleaming in the sun, their fingers sticky with incense resin. Temples reopen, offerings pile high. Everyone breathes easier, the gods are home again. But Tut is fragile. You walk beside him through a palace courtyard. He limps slightly. Some scholars believe he had a clubbed foot. Others say malaria. Maybe both. You notice his thin frame, his uncertain posture, the weight of a crown that clearly doesn't fit. And yet, despite everything, he reigns for nearly a decade. He tries. He rebuilds. He commissions small temples, returns stolen lands to the priesthood, even leads a modest military campaign. Or, at least, someone said he did. He's a pharaoh playing catch-up with destiny. And then, suddenly, he's gone. Historians still argue over what killed him. A broken leg gone septic, a chariot crash, a genetic disorder from too much royal inbreeding. You stand by the mummy in the 20th century, watching CT scans and speculation swirl like desert winds. And here comes the real twist. For 3,000 years, nobody cared about him. His tomb was tiny, hasty, probably not meant for a king at all. You walk through it now, packed to the ceiling with golden beds, chariots, sandals, and bizarre treasures, all crammed together like a pharaoh's garage sale, but at least it's intact, miraculously untouched by tomb robbers. And that changes everything. Flash forward to 1922. You stand behind Howard Carter, a British archaeologist wiping sweat from his brow in the Valley of the Kings. He's digging, slowly, methodically, and suddenly his team hits steps, a sealed doorway, and then that famous moment. Carter peers inside. "Can you see anything?" his patron asks. "Yes," Carter whispers. "Wonderful things." You step through the dusty threshold into history's most famous discovery. Gold glints in every direction. A chariot leans against a wall. A golden throne, lions roaring from its arms. But the centerpiece, Tutankhamun's death mask, stares back at you, serene, immortal, and oddly familiar. You've seen it on mugs, posters, cartoons. But here, in the silence, it takes your breath away. And the world, it loses its mind. Tutmania erupts. The 1920s are already wild. Jazz, flappers, cigarettes in long holders. And now they've got curses. Newspapers scream about deaths surrounding the tomb. Lord Carnarvon dies from a mosquito bite turned infection. The lights in Cairo mysteriously go out. A cobra eats Carter's pet canary. Coincidence? Probably. But the press is too enchanted to care. You hear whispers of a curse scratched into a clay tablet. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king. Spoiler. No such inscription was found, but try telling that to a tabloid editor. The quirky truth. Carter's team catalogued over 5,000 objects from the tomb, everything from gilded coffins to a jar of ancient honey. Some of the artifacts even travelled the globe, drawing millions. You watch tourists in 1970s Paris gawking at Tut's slippers under glass, clutching their Polaroids. But what about Egypt? Back home, Tutankhamun becomes a national symbol. School children memorize his name. His mask becomes the face of ancient glory. Meanwhile, modern scholars pore over every inch of his remains, his artifacts, his unfinished legacy. You peek into his tomb one last time. It's still there, still humid, still dimly lit. The walls show the boy king greeted by Osiris, embraced by gods. Despite all the mystery, all the noise, this space remains small, intimate, strangely human. Tutankhamun didn't rewrite history. He barely made a dent in it while alive. But in death, he did something none of Egypt's greatest pharaohs managed. He became unforgettable. The torch dims after Tutankhamun. You wander through a palace corridor, still echoing, with hurried footsteps and half-finished prayers. Egypt is weary, like someone waking from a strange dream with a faint memory of sunlight-shaped gods and too many advisors with too many ideas. Tut's death leaves a vacuum, and into that vacuum steps A, the elderly vizier, who may or may not have pulled more strings than a puppet master at a scribal puppet show. You watch him don the crown, already looking like he'd rather be napping. His reign is short, filled with tense smiles and quiet politics. You nod politely as he marries Ankhesenamun, Tut's widow, possibly his own granddaughter, because dynastic continuity apparently has no chill. Then comes Horemheb, a general, a man who looks like he's ready to wrestle the entire priesthood before breakfast. You find him pacing through the military barracks, red-faced and sharp-tongued. He didn't have royal blood, but he had ambition, enough to retroactively erase his two predecessors from the king lists. Yep, as far as official records go, I and Tutankhamun just never happened. Bold move. He sets about restoring order, rebuilding Egypt's shattered bureaucracy, and smacking corruption in the face with new law codes. You sit in courtrooms where officials now face actual consequences for embezzlement. It's refreshing, also a little terrifying. And then comes a new dynasty, the 19th, born not from temples or royal blood, but from military grit. You meet Ramses I, a man who barely has time to adjust his crown before handing it off to his son, Seti the Fin, one of Egypt's finest rulers and one heck of a temple decorator. You tour Abydos, where Seti's temple boasts one of the clearest king lists in Egypt, conveniently skipping over the whole Aten mess. You sit beside him in the war tent as he plans campaigns against the Libyans and Hittites. The strategy is sharp, his soldiers loyal, his beard immaculate, but it's his son who steals the spotlight and refuses to give it back. Ramses II, Ramses the Great, the guy who probably built a statue of himself before his first coffee. You can't walk 5 minutes without bumping into his face. Temples? He builds more than he can visit. Statues, giant, letters, boastful, diplomacy, aggressive, and yet oddly effective. You're there for the Battle of Kadesh. You've heard of it, everyone has. The Hittites and Egyptians face off in what might be the most over-documented draw in history. Ramesses marches ahead of his army, gets caught in an ambush, prays to Amun, and single-handedly rallies his forces, or so the story goes. Historians still argue just how heroic it really was. The Hittites claim a win. Ramesses claims a big win. You suspect it was more like Let's not do this again. We both have enough statues to polish. And so they sign a peace treaty, arguably the world's first surviving international treaty. You peek at a clay copy stored in modern-day Turkey. It reads like a mix of wedding vows and diplomatic prenup. We won't attack you. You won't attack us. Let's all stop stabbing and enjoy some wine. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, Ramses rules for 66 years. You watch generations of Egyptians born and buried under his reign. He outlives wives, sons, enemies, and, probably, his patience. You visit Abu Simbel, his crowning architectural glory. 4 colossal statues of himself stare across the Nile like divine bouncers. Inside, the temple aligns with the sun twice a year, lighting up the sanctuary with pinpoint precision. Engineers today still scratch their heads. You suspect aliens. Just kidding. Probably. One quirky rumor. Some scholars think Ramesses may be the pharaoh of the Exodus story. You sit in the back of a dusty library, listening to debates that span centuries, traditions, and interpretations. No hard evidence, just layers of narrative. Egypt, once again, sitting at the crossroads of legend and stone. Eventually, even Ramesses has to bow out. You pass his mummy centuries later, face calm, hands crossed, and wonder what it's like to rule for longer than most people live. The priests bury him in the Valley of the Kings, but looters don't let him rest. You follow his coffin as it's moved, hidden, relocated again, like a god perpetually evading the chaos he once held at bay. After him, the 19th dynasty begins to wobble. His successors, Meniptah, Seti II, Siptah, lack his gravitas. You see ministers fighting for power. Queen Tusret briefly rules, her face scratched from later reliefs. The gods are still honoured, temples still built. But there's a creeping fatigue in the air. Egypt feels bloated, brittle, a golden monument with hairline cracks beneath the paint. Then another power shift, the 20th dynasty, and with it, Ramesses III. You walk with him through Medinet Habu, his fortress-like temple carved with battle scenes that practically roar in your ears. He fights the Libyans. He crushes the sea peoples. You watch foreign invaders slam into Egypt's borders like waves against rock, and Egypt holds, for now. But even Ramesses III can't patch everything. Inflation creeps in, corruption spreads, and then comes something almost unthinkable, a strike. You wander into Deir el-Medina, the village of tomb builders, and find workers sitting down, not building, not digging, protesting. Their wages are late, their rations short. It's history's first recorded labour strike, and the message is simple: pay us or find your own afterlife. Even gods need their houses painted after all. You visit papyri that detail conspiracies in the harem, trials of royal wives plotting to assassinate the king. The courtroom drama unfolds in whispers and execution lists. The gods stay silent. The Golden Age ends not with a bang, but a quiet unraveling. The tombs get smaller, the statues more generic. You walk past temples stripped of copper and grain. Priests barter instead of pray. And Egypt, glorious ancient Egypt, starts slipping into the shadow of its own greatness. You wander through a half-abandoned palace courtyard, noticing weeds poking through the limestone tiles. The Golden Age has dulled, like a once-polished mirror, now smudged with time. Egypt is still Egypt, technically. There's a pharaoh. There are temples. The Nile still does its thing, but the magic is stretched thin. And yet, one face continues to grin from colossi and temple walls across the land. Ramesses II. You'd think he was still alive. Statues of him outnumber actual people in some towns. You rest against a sandstone pillar and count 6 Ramseses in one mural, all doing something heroic. One's smiting enemies. Another is feeding the gods. A third is possibly just posing. It's hard to tell anymore. There's a phrase you hear from the scribes in the temple archives: he who makes monuments for eternity. Ramesses II took that seriously. Maybe too seriously. You climb the steps at Luxor Temple, which he renovated by adding his name everywhere. On walls, he didn't build. On columns, he barely touched, sometimes even right over older pharaohs' inscriptions. One tired stonemason mumbles that they just used a chisel, with Ramesses pre-carved into it. But here's the thing, all this grandeur, it hides the creeping rot underneath. You sit in the shade of a sycamore near Thebes, and overhear merchants whispering about food prices. A bar of bread costs more than a pair of sandals. The granaries are guarded more tightly than temples. something's off. It's not just the economy, it's the empire itself. The edges are fraying. Canaan rebels. Nubia flares up. You meet scribes who've stopped reporting victories and started writing excuses. Still, Ramses the Third, 2 dynasties down the line, makes one last stand. He looks and acts like his great predecessor, and for a while, it works. You're there when the Sea Peoples arrive. Strange raiders from who knows where, attacking in waves of fire and bronze. Egypt holds them off, but barely. At Medinet Habu, Ramses III carves the victory into stone. Massive walls show ships ramming, spears flying, enemies trampled. It's cinematic. It's also desperate. Historians still argue whether the Sea Peoples were invaders or just displaced groups fleeing their own collapsing homelands. Either way, the chaos leaves scars. The Eastern Mediterranean falls into what some call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Egypt survives, but just. You stroll through cities that once buzzed with trade and now hum with suspicion. Then the harem conspiracy. You find yourself deep inside a dim court chamber, papyri spread out in front of you. Servants testify, wives whisper, poison is mentioned. Ramesses, the third's own household, is implicated in a plot to kill him. The trial is tense. Names are crossed out, sentences passed. Some are exiled. Others, less lucky, are forced to take their own lives. One conspirator's nose and ears are cut off. You step back slowly. A quirky detail. The papyrus describing this trial even notes which scribes cried, which ones lost composure, and who had bad handwriting. Bureaucracy, always thorough. After Ramses III, Egypt spirals. You watch the 20th dynasty flicker out like an exhausted oil lamp. The kings that follow, still named Ramesses. Lots of them. Ramesses the 4th through the 11th. You stop trying to keep count after the 7th. Each one weaker than the last, like a photocopy of a king. They still build temples, sort of. But the stone is cheaper, the inscriptions clumsier. You stand beside workers carving a half-hearted battle scene where the enemy looks more bored than defeated. It's Egypt on autopilot. And then something unthinkable happens. The pharaohs lose Thebes. It's not a dramatic coup, more like a bureaucratic slide. The high priests of Amun gradually take over southern Egypt. You visit Karnak and see them acting like kings in all but name, controlling land, armies, temples. They even start mummifying themselves like royalty. At one point, the high priest Herihor claims the title of King of Upper Egypt. Meanwhile, in the north, the pharaoh still reigns from Tanis, which sounds regal until you see it's mostly marshes and mid-level panic. Egypt is now split, north versus south, pharaoh versus priest. It's a cold war in sandals. You spend time in both courts. In the north, the kings try to maintain order, sending out letters, gifts, and everything is fine edicts. In the south, the priests quietly absorb more and more. You realize that this isn't just about politics, it's about belief. The gods, once distant and divine, now need middlemen more than ever, and those middlemen are running the show. One fringe theory you overhear from a drunken scholar at a crocodile shrine. Some believe the priests intentionally let the central government weaken so they could step in. You're not sure about that, but you are sure of this. Power in Egypt now comes with a prayer scroll and a tax receipt. You return to the Valley of the Kings, hoping for echoes of glory, but tomb robbing has reached industrial levels. You find smashed sarcophagi, stripped walls, even mummies shoved into shared graves. The workman's village at Deir el-Medina, once home to the elite of Egypt's artisans, lies abandoned. And so Egypt fades, not into silence, but into fragmentation. The new kingdom is over. The empire is gone. The monuments remain, wind-blown and defiant, but the people are tired. You sit on the steps of a cracked temple, watching the sun set behind crumbling pylons. Somewhere a child sings a hymn to Amun, off-key, maybe, but sincere. Egypt isn't dead, but it is no longer invincible. Adao of its own greatness. You wake to a new kind of stillness, not the peaceful calm of river reeds at dawn, but a brittle quiet, the hush of a kingdom slowly forgetting how to be whole. Egypt, once the lion of the ancient world, now looks over its shoulder more often than it looks ahead. You start your day in Tanis, the northern capital. The air smells of wet stone and half-finished promises. Pharaohs still issue proclamations here, still hold ceremonies, but it's like watching someone rehearse for a play that no one's attending. The city feels small despite the walls. You hear foreign languages in the markets, see unfamiliar armor among the guards. Egypt is no longer alone. Across the sea, the Mediterranean world is stirring. In the east, empires rise and fall like summer storms. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians. You hear their names whispered in temple courts like approaching thunder. The Hittites are gone. The Mycenaeans vanished. Even mighty Troy is rubble. And Egypt is holding on, but only just. Down south, Thebes remains devout. You visit the temple of Amun and see rituals still performed with sacred rigor. The priests now rule more land than the pharaoh. Offerings flow to their granaries. Armies answer to their commands. In some inscriptions, they even list themselves as kings. You catch a mural where a high priest's name is carved in royal cartouches. That used to be a serious flex. Now it's just Thursday. This fractured era, what scholars call the Third Intermediate Period, is basically a choose-your-own dynasty adventure. You've got rulers in Tanis claiming divine authority, high priests in Thebes acting like governors, and then, surprise guest stars, the Libyans. You meet Sheshonq I, a Libyan military commander who doesn't just insert himself into Egyptian politics, he plants his family right on the throne. New dynasty, same problems. His son becomes high priest. His cousins take over key provinces. You'd think it was nepotism if it weren't so efficient. A quirky detail, Shishonq, even makes it into the Bible as Shishak, the king who invades Jerusalem. You hear rumors of looted treasure and divine retribution, but the papyri don't exactly match the scripture. The truth? Probably somewhere in the footnotes. Still, the Libyan pharaohs don't inspire fear like the Thutmoses or Rameses did. You walk through their tombs and find reused stones, budget construction, and a whole lot of recycled grandeur. Egypt is stretching its history like linen cloth too often washed, thin in places, fraying at the seams. You sail north again and find another surprise. The Nubians are coming. Yes, Nubia, once the land Egypt raided for gold and cattle, is now rising with its own kings, temples, and ambitions. You meet Paye, a Kushite king who speaks fluent Egyptian, writes hymns to Amun, and declares himself the rightful heir to the pharaonic tradition. And to make the point clear, he marches into Egypt and takes it. You follow his army as it moves north with precision, not destruction. He doesn't burn cities. He doesn't defile temples. In fact, he prays at them, offers sacrifices, issues proclamations of peace through divine order. He conquers Egypt by claiming he's restoring it. Historians still argue whether Pia's campaign was one of military conquest or spiritual correction. One thing's certain. His stela at Jebel Barkal boasts with delightful confidence. You can still read his words. He's a lion, while they are like dogs crouching in the dust. Subtle. Pia establishes the 25th dynasty, and suddenly Egypt has a Nubian renaissance. You attend festivals that blend Egyptian and Kushite styles. Statues now show pharaohs with strong Nubian features and curled hair. There's a quiet pride in the air, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the old ways are returning. But the world has changed too much. From the northeast, a new power rises, the Assyrians. And they're not here to sip wine and debate theology. You watch their armies roll through the Levant with steel precision, siege engines, iron weapons, psychological warfare. Egypt is next. You huddle in Memphis as the Assyrians invade. It's brutal, fast and cold. Temples are looted, cities razed. You see foreign soldiers dragging statues of Amun into carts. The gods look heavy and humiliated. Taharka, a powerful Nubian pharaoh, fights back valiantly. You're with him when he rallies his troops, offering gold, honor, and divine protection. But against the Assyrian war machine, devotion is only part of the battle. Eventually, he flees south. Egypt is occupied. Again. One odd moment. You stumble across a letter from an Assyrian general stationed in Egypt complaining about the heat, the mosquitoes, and the locals' tendency to pray at inconvenient times. The more things change, but Egypt still refuses to vanish. After the Assyrians pull back, local dynasties re-emerge. You meet Psamtik the Hun, a governor from Sais in the Delta, who slowly reunites Egypt with the help of foreign mercenaries, Greek ones no less. You overhear conversations in Ionian and Carian near the Nile docks. Egyptian kids learn how to shout, "Stop stealing my donkey," in multiple languages. And the Greeks, they love Egypt. They treat it like a living museum. They tour temples, scribble graffiti on statues, write travel journals with names like "On the Wonders of the Nile." One traveller in particular, Herodotus, walks the dusty roads and calls Egypt the gift of the Nile. You try not to roll your eyes. He's a bit dramatic, but he's not wrong. Egypt is back under native rule for a brief, brilliant moment. The 26th dynasty, also called the Saite Renaissance, gives you a glimpse of the old spirit. Art becomes crisper, hieroglyphs sharper. Kings dress like the pharaohs of old. But it's nostalgia wearing makeup. Because just over the horizon, the Persians are coming. You smell it before you see it. Burning incense, foreign spices, the distant bite of Persian frankincense blending with good old-fashioned Egyptian dust. The horizon quivers with heat and hooves. And once again, Egypt is on the brink of becoming someone else's crown jewel. Enter the Persians, stage right. Tall hats, long beards, and an empire that stretches from the Indus to the Aegean. You hear their name whispered before they even arrive. Cambyses, son of Cyrus the Great, conqueror of pharaohs. Not exactly here to make friends. You stand outside the temple of Neith in Sais when the word comes, Memphis has fallen. Egypt has been conquered. Again. Cambyses marches into the country like he's shopping for provinces. He captures Psamtik III, the last native king of the 26th dynasty, and allegedly parades him around in chains. Some say he desecrates temples, kills sacred animals, mocks the gods. Others insist he honors Egyptian customs and tries to blend in. Historians still argue about it. Was Cambyses a blasphemer or just tragically bad at public relations? Either way, Egypt is now part of the Achaemenid Empire, a satrapy, a province with a tax quota and a governor. You sit beside Darius III as he reviews tribute lists written in Old Persian, Aramaic, and yes, demoted hieroglyphs. Egypt's language isn't banned, but it's no longer top billing. A quirky moment. Darius commissions a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, an ancient precursor to the Suez Canal. You walk along its dusty bank, passing engineers from Babylon, Persia, even a few wandering Greeks scribbling sketches in papyrus notebooks. Despite the foreign rule, some things stay stubbornly Egyptian. You watch locals still mummifying their dead, still praying to Thoth, still painting Horus falcons on their tomb doors. The Persians, in a surprisingly pragmatic move, allow temples to keep functioning, as long as they don't revolt. Spoiler, some still do. Egypt revolts a lot. Over the next century, you get used to uprisings. Libyan nobles declare themselves kings. The Delta catches fire more than once. A guy named Amyrtius even manages to boot the Persians temporarily and becomes the sole ruler of the 28th dynasty. You overhear him bragging at a feast about how he single-handedly restored Egyptian independence. He lasts 6 years. Then more dynasties shuffle through. The 29th, the 30th. Homegrown, yes, but under constant pressure. Art becomes traditional to the point of rigidity. You examine statues where every pharaoh looks like he walked out of the 5th dynasty, even though it's 900 years later. Its style as resistance, stone as stubbornness. You meet Nectanebo Wawan, who pours gold into temples, rebuilds Karnak, and funds massive religious festivals. His idea? If you can't outmuscle the Persians, outpray them. You watch firelight flicker over rows of priests chanting for divine protection, and for a while, it works. But in 343 BCE, the Persians return, under Artaxerxes III. He storms Egypt with the subtlety of a falling obelisk. Temples are sacked. Priests are punished. Some cities vanish entirely from the records. This time, the conquest sticks. Egypt is not just conquered, it's dismembered. And then, just when it seems the ancient kingdom might fade completely, someone rides in from the north. You spot him on horseback, a dusty cloak over polished armor. Young, charismatic, Greek, obsessed with Homer, obsessed with glory. Alexander. He enters Egypt not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Persians are deeply unpopular by now, so when Alexander arrives in 332 BCE, the people cheer. Priests greet him, scribes take note. You watch as he visits the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where the god allegedly tells him he's divine. You raise an eyebrow. He nods solemnly. You're not sure if he believes it, or just enjoys the headlines. He founds a city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria. You walk its shoreline, feeling the salt breeze and hearing dozens of languages in the streets. Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Phoenicians, all trading, arguing, philosophizing. It doesn't feel like old Egypt. It feels like something new. After Alexander dies in Babylon, barely 33 years old, his generals carve the empire into pieces. Egypt falls to one of them, Ptolemy. And now the final act begins, the Ptolemaic dynasty. You follow Ptolemy I as he establishes himself not just as a ruler, but a pharaoh. He learns the rituals, builds temples to the old gods, funds translations of Egyptian texts into Greek. It's a fusion of cultures, a cocktail of marble columns and ibis feathers. One curious artifact you see being drafted, the Rosetta Stone, written in 3 scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. It's a trilingual brag sheet, sure, but one that centuries later will break the code of the entire Egyptian language. The Ptolemies rule for nearly 300 years. Some are scholars, some are warlords, many are both. You watch generations of Greek-speaking royals marry their siblings for tradition, commission grand temples to Isis for legitimacy, and accidentally invent soap opera politics centuries before Netflix. You see the rise of Alexandria, its lighthouse one of the 7 wonders, its library legendary. You stand in the great library's reading hall, the scent of ink and saltwood thick in the air, as scholars debate star charts, medicine, and the soul. But the real story, the one everyone remembers, is coming. Her name is Cleopatra. She speaks 9 languages. She reads hieroglyphs. She charms Rome's most powerful men and holds Egypt together by sheer force of personality. But you'll get to her soon. For now, you sit on a marble step beside the sea. The sun sets over Alexandria, casting gold across the water. The papyrus rustles, the past whispers, and Egypt, as ever, keeps watching the horizon. You wake to the smell of brine and politics. The Mediterranean laps against stone harbours. Seagulls wheel above marble columns. Greek voices echo from scroll-stuffed lecture halls. But the statues still wear lotus crowns. Incense still curls from temple doorways. You're in Egypt, but not the one you started with. Welcome to Ptolemaic Egypt, the last act of a very long play. You walk through Alexandria, the city Alexander dreamed into existence, and it's thriving. Traders haggle in Greek, scribes argue in Egyptian, philosophers quote Plato while buying falafel. Cultures layer like limestone, Greek over Egyptian, over Persian, over something far older. You pass the lighthouse, Pharos, gleaming white, towering above the sea like a stone god of navigation. Ships come here from everywhere, Cyprus, Carthage, Rome, India. And the great library, it's alive. You watch scrolls being copied, translated, catalogued by scholars who speak in tongues older than dirt. The knowledge of the world is piled into one place, and occasionally lost in fires. Because, history. But beneath the learning and light, something is off. The Ptolemies, descendants of Ptolemy the Fern, one of Alexander's generals, rule Egypt like a family business crossed with a soap opera. Every Ptolemy is named either Ptolemy or Cleopatra, or Arsinoe, or some cursed combination of all 3. You start keeping a chart and immediately regret it. You're there for royal weddings, where siblings marry siblings, then poison each other. You see palace coups where uncles backstab nephews before breakfast. It's as if the gods of chaos were given a palace and unlimited wine. Still, the rulers know how to play the Egyptian game. They honor the gods, fund temples, and, most importantly, maintain the appearance of tradition. You step into the temple of Horus at Edfu, built during this supposedly foreign period, and it looks like something straight out of the 18th dynasty. Columns carved like bundles of reeds, hawks guarding the entrance, reliefs of the king smiting enemies who were probably already dead. It's a deliberate callback, Egypt remembering itself. But while the temples flourish, the people struggle. Taxes rise. Land ownership concentrates in fewer hands. The Greek elite get privileges the native Egyptians don't. You hear grumbling in marketplaces, in farm fields, in temples behind drawn curtains. Rebellions break out in Upper Egypt, quiet at first, then louder. Historians still debate how Greek the Ptolemies really were. On one hand, they never bothered to learn Egyptian until Cleopatra. On the other hand, they embraced the gods, married locals, and built temples that any old kingdom priest would recognize. Cultural fusion, cultural appropriation, or just politics in eyeliner. And yes, Cleopatra. You meet her first as a teenager, strolling through a garden with a scroll in one hand and a dagger in the other. Sharp eyes, sharper wit. She's the first Ptolemaic monarch in generations who actually learns Egyptian. She reads, she writes, she governs. And she has plans. Egypt is now caught in the gravity of Rome. You walk through Alexandria's embassy row and hear Latin more than Greek. Roman merchants cut deals. Roman generals whisper threats. The Ptolemies are pawns in a larger game, and Cleopatra refuses to be a pawn. So she turns on the charm. First, Julius Caesar. You're there when she arrives at his feet, allegedly rolled in a carpet. Whether true or not, the symbolism sticks. She becomes his lover, bears his child, and rules beside him, if from a polite distance, until his murder sends the Roman world into a tailspin. Then comes Mark Antony. You attend the famous banquet in Tarsus. Perfumed sails, golden goblets, Cleopatra dressed as Isis. Antony falls hard. You join their journey back to Egypt, floating down the Nile on a barge lined with rose petals and wine-soaked diplomats. It's dramatic, indulgent, and calculated. Together, they rule Egypt and large chunks of the eastern Mediterranean. You watch them mint coins with their faces, throw festivals to Dionysus, and raise twin children named Helios and Selene, sun and moon. Because, of course. But Rome doesn't like rivals. Octavian, later Augustus, declares war, not just on Cleopatra and Antony, but on the idea of an independent Egypt. You sail with their fleet to Actium. You watch the wind shift, the battle turn. You hear Cleopatra order the retreat. You see Antony's confusion, his heartbreak. And finally, in Alexandria, the end. You walk through marble corridors where the silence is heavy. Antony dies by his own sword. Cleopatra, famously, by asp, or maybe poison, hidden in a hairpin. Historians still argue, fringe theory, the asp was just for show. You stand by her tomb, now lost to time, and feel something vast collapse. Not just a dynasty, but a civilization's last breath. Rome annexes Egypt in 30 BCE. The temples go on for a while. The priests still light incense. The scribes still write. But now, statues of emperors wear pharaoh crowns. Taxes go to Rome. Governors speak Latin. The gods get quieter. You sit in a crumbling Alexandrian courtyard, scrolls scattered by the wind. The library is ash now. The lighthouse will soon fall to an earthquake. And Cleopatra, last of the pharaohs, is myth. But Egypt isn't gone. She simply stops being the center of the world and becomes its memory. You blink, and the Roman banners are already flying above Alexandria's harbour. The eagle's standard flaps beside fading lotus columns, and just like that, Egypt isn't a kingdom anymore. It's a province. Provincia Aegypti. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? Octavian, soon to be Augustus, takes no chances. He appoints a prefect, not a senator, to govern Egypt. Why? Because Egypt, with its grain, gold, and gods, is too valuable to risk in the hands of a politician with ambition. You hear a Roman say, "He who controls Egypt controls Rome's breadbasket." You believe it. Rome eats because the Nile floods. You wander through Alexandria again, but something's different. The buzz of power is gone. Cleopatra's court is silent. The philosophers speak more softly now. Latin words edge out Greek in official scrolls. You hear the sound of sandals slapping marble, but they're marching, not dancing. Still, the temples keep smoking. Priests at Dendera still chant to Hathor. You watch the last hieroglyphic inscription carved into a wall at Philae, dated to 394 CE. After that, silence. The ancient script dies, unspoken and unread for over 1,000 years. You pause at a ceremony to Isis, and it feels like déjà vu. The priests perform every ritual perfectly, but they know, you know, these gods are no longer sovereign. They are tolerated, tourist attractions in their own land. And then something entirely different arrives, Christianity. It starts quietly, small groups meeting in homes, whispering about a man crucified in a far-off province. Then it spreads. Converts multiply. Pagan statues are defaced. Temples are repurposed or razed. You watch St. Mark's followers preach in Alexandria. They write in Greek, quote scripture, argue about the Trinity. You hear sermons echo from once pagan lecture halls. Egypt begins to reinvent itself again as a center of Christian theology. The Coptic church is born. Monasteries rise in the desert. You meet anchorites, hermits wrapped in linen robes, living in silence, chasing divine simplicity. One tells you, the gods are gone, but the desert still listens. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire splits and sputters. Barbarians sack Rome, trade weakens. The imperial center shifts east to Byzantium. Egypt becomes a corner in someone else's fading map. In 641 CE, another wind sweeps in. Arab armies, under the banner of Islam. You're there when Amr ibn al-As enters Fustat, near modern-day Cairo. The old Greek and Roman administrators scatter. The Coptic Christians negotiate. Arabic begins to trickle into the cities. Within a few centuries, it replaces Greek. Islam becomes dominant. The last temple priests are gone. The hieroglyphs? Forgotten, silent as stone. But here's the twist. Egypt doesn't vanish. She adapts. You walk through medieval Cairo, bustling, vibrant, Islamic, and yet unmistakably Egyptian. Minarets rise beside ancient pylons. Calligraphy swirls over doorways. Papyrus gives way to parchment. Alexandria is no longer the jewel of the empire, but it's still a port, still humming. A quirky detail. Centuries later, when the French arrive with Napoleon, they bring scientists. And those scientists stumble across something strange near Rosetta. A slab of black basalt with 3 scripts etched into it. Greek, Demotic, hieroglyphic. You lean over the Rosetta Stone with Jean-François Champollion in 1822. His eyes gleam. He's about to crack the code that has silenced the ancient Egyptians for over 1,400 years. And when he does, the entire civilization begins to speak again. You read the words of Seti, of Hatshepsut, of a scribe complaining about his back pain and bad boss. They are alive once more. Soon, archaeologists arrive in droves. You meet Flinders Petrie in a dusty trench, measuring potsherds with manic intensity. You watch Howard Carter brush dust from the golden mask of Tutankhamun. Tourists begin arriving with parasols and leather-bound guidebooks. The Valley of the Kings becomes more crowded than when it was actually in use. Egypt becomes an obsession. Museums fill with her treasures. Authors, poets, movie studios, all steal her stories. You see Cleopatra painted by Renaissance artists, then portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor. The gods become comic book characters. The pharaohs, pop culture icons. Historians still argue whether modern Egypt belongs to its ancient past, or if it's been misappropriated by everyone from Napoleon to Hollywood. You sit at a cafe in Luxor as 2 tourists debate mummies while sipping mango juice. You wonder what the ancients would think. But Egypt, she endures. In Cairo, you ride the subway past stations named for pharaohs. You visit the Grand Egyptian Museum, gleaming, futuristic, and filled with relics thousands of years old. You see children sketching pyramids with crayons. You hear prayers from a minaret, smell spices in the market, and walk through ruins that were old when Rome was young. Egypt has changed costumes many times, from papyrus scrolls to pixel screens, from temple chants to prayer calls, from Horus to Google Maps. But she's still here, still watching the river, still listening to the wind, still telling stories in stone. You blink and the Roman banners are already flying above Alexandria's harbour. The eagle's standard flaps beside fading lotus columns, and just like that, Egypt isn't a kingdom anymore. It's a province. Provincia Aegypti. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? Octavian, soon to be Augustus, takes no chances. He appoints a prefect, not a senator, to govern Egypt. Why? Because Egypt, with its grain, gold, and gods, is too valuable to risk in the hands of a politician with ambition. You hear a Roman say, "He who controls Egypt controls Rome's breadbasket." You believe it. Rome eats because the Nile floods. You wander through Alexandria again, but something's different. The buzz of power is gone. Cleopatra's court is silent. The philosophers speak more softly now. Latin words edge out Greek in official scrolls. You hear the sound of sandals slapping marble, but they're marching, not dancing. Still, the temples keep smoking. Priests at Dendera still chant to Hathor. You watch the last hieroglyphic inscription carved into a wall at Philae, dated to 394 CE. After that, silence. The ancient script dies, unspoken and unread for over 1,000 years. You pause at a ceremony to Isis, and it feels like déjà vu. The priests perform every ritual perfectly, but they know, you know, these gods are no longer sovereign. They are tolerated, tourist attractions in their own land. And then something entirely different arrives: Christianity. It starts quietly, small groups meeting in homes, whispering about a man crucified in a far-off province. Then it spreads. Converts multiply. Pagan statues are defaced. Temples are repurposed or razed. You watch St. Mark's followers preach in Alexandria. They write in Greek, quote scripture, argue about the Trinity. You hear sermons echo from once pagan lecture halls. Egypt begins to reinvent itself again as a center of Christian theology. The Coptic church is born. Monasteries rise in the desert. You meet anchorites, hermits wrapped in linen robes, living in silence, chasing divine simplicity. One tells you, the gods are gone, but the desert still listens. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire splits and sputters. Barbarians sack Rome, trade weakens. The imperial center shifts east to Byzantium. Egypt becomes a corner in someone else's fading map. In 641 CE, another wind sweeps in. Arab armies, under the banner of Islam. You're there when Amr ibn al-As enters Fustat, near modern-day Cairo. The old Greek and Roman administrators scatter. The Coptic Christians negotiate. Arabic begins to trickle into the cities. Within a few centuries, it replaces Greek. Islam becomes dominant. The last temple priests are gone. The hieroglyphs? Forgotten, silent as stone. But here's the twist. Egypt doesn't vanish. She adapts. You walk through medieval Cairo, bustling, vibrant, Islamic, and yet unmistakably Egyptian. Minarets rise beside ancient pylons. Calligraphy swirls over doorways. Papyrus gives way to parchment. Alexandria is no longer the jewel of the empire, but it's still a port, still humming. A quirky detail: centuries later, when the French arrive with Napoleon, they bring scientists. And those scientists stumble across something strange near Rosetta: a slab of black basalt with 3 scripts etched into it: Greek, Demotic, hieroglyphic. You lean over the Rosetta Stone with Jean-François Champollion in 1822. His eyes gleam. He's about to crack the code that has silenced the ancient Egyptians for over 1,400 years. And when he does, the entire civilization begins to speak again. You read the words of Seti, of Hatshepsut, of a scribe complaining about his back pain and bad boss. They are alive once more. Soon, archaeologists arrive in droves. You meet Flinders Petrie in a dusty trench, measuring potsherds with manic intensity. You watch Howard Carter brush dust from the golden mask of Tutankhamun. Tourists begin arriving with parasols and leather-bound guidebooks. The Valley of the Kings becomes more crowded than when it was actually in use. Egypt becomes an obsession. Museums fill with her treasures. Authors, poets, movie studios, all steal her stories. You see Cleopatra painted by Renaissance artists, then portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor. The gods become comic book characters. The pharaohs, pop culture icons. Historians still argue whether modern Egypt belongs to its ancient past, or if it's been misappropriated by everyone from Napoleon to Hollywood. You sit at a cafe in Luxor as 2 tourists debate mummies while sipping mango juice. You wonder what the ancients would think. But Egypt, she endures. In Cairo, you ride the subway past stations named for pharaohs. You visit the Grand Egyptian Museum, gleaming, futuristic, and filled with relics thousands of years old. You see children sketching pyramids with crayons. You hear prayers from a minaret, smell spices in the market, and walk through ruins that were old when Rome was young. Egypt has changed costumes many times, from papyrus scrolls to pixel screens, from temple chants to prayer calls, from Horus to Google Maps. But she's still here, still watching the river, still listening to the wind, still telling stories in stone.